Thank you very much. So good afternoon, you guys. I want to thank you for coming. I know some of you have to be here anyway, right, for class. So as Professor Clifford said, my name is Dr. Marcille. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm a professor and the director of undergraduate studies at Palo, Alto University in the Pacific Clinical Psychology, and I'm also the president of the California Psychological Association. So hopefully that impresses you, and I know what I'm talking about. So the goal of the talk this afternoon is to introduce to you some of the latest findings that we have about addictions and their treatment. I mean, as Professor Clifford said, this is a serious problem, around the world in the United States today, and I'm going to share with you some statistics about the extent of the problem. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard about the opioid epidemic in California. We haven't been afflicted too much yet with that, but it's coming. I mean, there are states across the country where literally hundreds of people are dying each week as a result of opioid addiction and heroin overdoses and whatnot. And then I want to share with you a little bit about the psychology and the neuroscience and how the science of psychology is changing our view of addictions drastically from what it has been for hundreds of years. And then talk to you about some of the treatment approaches, which many of you may never have heard of, that are effective nowadays in treating addictions. And as you're going to see, when we think about addictions, we typically talk about alcohol and drug addictions, but there's a whole other range of behaviors that psychology and psychiatry are now recognizing as addictive behaviors. Addiction to the use of the internet, addiction to food, addiction to exercise, addiction to pornography, addiction to all sorts of behaviors that you might not normally think were an addiction. But I hope after the end of today's talk and stuff, you understand, might be, and that each one of us might have some problems and have to deal with that. The other thing that is relevant to today's talk is a growing need for people who are trained to help individuals with addictions. I recently met with a couple dozen of the local community agencies in Santa Clara County, agencies that provide mental health services, and they're desperate, for employees, people with associate and bachelor degrees, who can work as case managers and who can help people who have addiction problems as well as other mental health issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we're done. So just some background information. Today, there are more than a couple 100,000 people worldwide who die every year from drug overdoses. That's alcohol, heroin, cocaine, and other forms of substances. I mean, more than 1 billion people smoke. And smoking, even though we don't see a lot of that here, I mean, if any of you have traveled any place outside California in the United States, you'll encounter populations where almost 50% of the population smokes, Smoking is implicated in the top 5 causes of death around the planet. That's heart disease, stroke, respiratory infections, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and lung cancer, In the United States, some 20 million, Americans have a substance use disorder. I mean, that's humongous, this is more common than cancer is, But because it's largely unseen and in most instances untreated, we tend not to see it. Some 2 million people have a substance use disorder involving prescription painkillers, You've all heard about the addiction or the problem with Oxycontin and codeine and whatnot. This is for real. And some 500,000 or almost 600,000 people have a substance abuse disorder involving heroin, oftentimes as a result of becoming addicted to painkillers and then needing to go to heroin when doctors stop prescribing these things. Drug overdose is the leading cause of accidental death in the U.S. right now. I mean, last year, over 52,000 people died of a drug overdose. And this year, every week, there are hundreds of people across the country and stuff that are overdosing and dying of drug overdoses. The opioid addiction is driving this epidemic. There's some 20,000 overdose deaths related to prescription pain relievers and another 13,000 that are associated with heroin. And in most instances, the heroin use follows addiction to prescription painkillers. In 2012, the last year that we've got statistics, there were almost 250 million prescriptions written for opioids, painkillers. So that's Oxycontin, codeine, Demerol, I forget some of the others and stuff. I mean, they're common things that people can get mostly from their general practitioner. This would provide enough
bottles of pills, or a bottle for each American that's alive today. And 4 out of 5 new heroin users started out misusing prescription painkillers, either inadvertently, meaning that people were prescribed a painkiller because they had a back problem or an injury and whatnot, and then became addicted and dependent upon them, or people helped themselves to their parents or their friends on pain medication stuff to party with and became addicted to them. In 2015, about 27% of people ages 18 and older, so that's adults, reported that they engaged in binge drinking, which is still the largest source of addictive behaviors in the world. And 7% reported that they engaged in heavy alcohol use in the last month. Okay? Alcohol use disorder, or AUD, is a chronic brain disease characterized by the following things: an inability to stop or control alcohol use despite adverse effects. And what that means is that adverse effects means you wake up with a hangover, okay? You can't go to work, you can't go to school, okay? You get into arguments and fights with people when you've had something to drink. You actually will skip important things or spend more money than you either have or should have on drinks and stuff because you have a dependency upon it. Alcohol use disorder can range from mild to severe. However, recovery is actually possible in almost all stages of the disease. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the new treatments that are available to help with alcohol dependency, as well as use and abuse of other forms of drugs. In 2015, approximately 15 million adults, whoops, I went backwards. Where am I here? College students. So among college-age students, I mean, most of your population and stuff, 2 years ago, there were almost 2,000 deaths related to alcohol-related unintentional injuries, okay, including accidents, motor accidents. Some 700,000 students between the ages of 18 and 24 are assaulted annually by another student who has been drinking. That may be a fight, or it might be a sexual assault stuff. I mean, in every college and university campus around the country, alcohol is related to sexual assaults and disciplinary issues and problems. Okay? And if any of you have ever attended a college campus where there are fraternity roles, sororities, and whatnot, Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturday nights are quite a wild time because of the overuse of alcohol. In 2015, there were 97,000 reported incidents of alcohol-related sexual abuse and date rape, and approximately 20% of college students meet the diagnostic criteria for alcohol use disorder. That is, drinking excessively and getting into difficulty or problems as a result of it. Okay? About 1 in 4 college students reports academic difficulties as a result of drinking, meaning waking up with a hangover and missing classes, falling behind in coursework, doing poorly on examinations, papers, and getting lower grades overall. In 2015, an estimated 88,000 people died in the U.S. from alcohol-related causes, okay? Making it the third leading cause of preventable deaths in the United States. The first is tobacco. I mean, tobacco still kills more people directly and indirectly than any other cause, preventable cause that we know about today. And the second is poor diet and physical inactivity. Okay? And I'm going to make a little reference later on to the fact that in many instances, our poor diet in the United States is actually associated with addiction. I mean, addiction to fast food, addiction to high caloric, sugary foods and whatnot, which in essence are an addiction, because most of us who try to stop consuming those things are unable to do so, for reasons that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. In 2014, there were almost 10,000 driving fatalities that were a result of alcohol use. Okay? Alcohol misuse cost the United States approximately $250 billion, okay, in lost wages and in health costs and productivity and whatnot. So it continues to be a gigantic problem, and yet these major, two of the leading causes of preventable death, alcohol and tobacco and stuff, what do they produce? I mean, who makes money off of the sale of alcohol and tobacco? Any ideas? I mean, the companies that produce them, obviously, but who else? The government. The government in terms of taxes. I mean, how much does a pack of cigarettes cost nowadays? $7. Outrageous. 90% of that is not the cost of the product, it's taxes and stuff. So our government actually makes money, ostensibly to help offset healthcare costs for people that have problems as a result of alcohol and tobacco addiction and stuff. But not a whole lot of that goes towards treatment and stuff. So in a perverted way, our own government and stuff profits from two of the leading causes of preventable death. Globally, in 2012, there were 3.3 million deaths, okay, or about 6% of all global preventable deaths that were due to alcohol consumption. And it's the 5th leading risk factor for premature death and disability around the planet. Now, recently, the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association has identified behavioral addiction or addictions, okay, as another source of tremendous problems. Up until recently, behaviors like shopping, okay, like gambling, like hoarding, like sex, use of the internet, video games and whatnot, were just considered behavioral problems. What we're now understanding is that these are another form of addiction, okay? They're behaviors that cause a tremendous amount of pleasure to individuals. They cause difficulties or problems because they cause people to spend an inordinate amount of time that they don't have on these activities, money spent on shopping, okay? They have an impact. People who have binge eating and whatnot, which is an addictive behavior, become obese, develop all sorts of health problems and whatnot. And we're now recognizing that these are addictive behaviors as well. And in just a little bit, I'm going to explain to you why that is. I mean, what the effect is on the brain, and what are some of the things that we can do about these things. So keep in mind, almost any pleasurable activity, okay, can become addictive, okay? And it means that most of the things that we do that are fun and enjoyable, we need to do in moderation, okay? Otherwise, we might develop an unhealthy attraction to it, and they might produce adverse consequences, as I mentioned before. How many of you have a smartphone? Everybody. Anybody ever have any difficulty in shutting it off? I mean, do any of you ever leave it at home for the day? No? A few of you do and stuff, okay? I mean, are you able to ignore, Facebook posts, Snapchats, Instagram updates, and posts every minute, okay? Does your phone interfere with driving? Does it interfere with conversations? I mean, how many of you try to have dinner and stuff with the phone, or be walking around or walk into things because you're busy checking your phone for messages and whatnot, okay? Prevents you from studying, prevents you from focusing your attention and whatnot. Anybody ever have an accident, as a result of trying to ignore your phone that's ringing in the car or trying to respond to a text message, okay? That's the indication of an addiction, okay? I mean, I actually work in my private practice. I work principally with teenagers and adolescents, and I've actually witnessed when parents have decided to take their son or their daughter's smartphone away from them, okay? And how do you think you guys would react if somebody took your phone away from you? Not very pleasantly and stuff. I mean, I've witnessed kids, 16, 17, 18-year-olds break down into tears, yell and scream, okay? Break into their parents' room to steal the phone back and whatnot. And in many ways, it's no different than somebody who's got a heroin addiction and whatnot, because there's a need to have that, a need to be in contact and connection with friends and whatnot. And as I'm going to describe, it's because this instrument and stuff affects our brain development. I'm not a conspiracy theorist or whatnot, but when you learn more about this, it makes you wonder, do these consumer electronic producers and stuff know what they're doing? Okay. Who is it? What is it? Facebook that has the like button, okay? The guy who developed the like button on Facebook, okay, is worth billions of dollars just because he developed that little icon and whatnot. Today, he won't let his own children, okay, use a smartphone because he's concerned about their addiction to the like button, okay? The like button is almost like a hit of cocaine or heroin and stuff in many people's minds and whatnot. So keep that in mind. Even the people who developed this technology, Steve Jobs, okay, the founder of Apple and whatnot, would not allow his children to use a computer at home, okay, because he was very concerned about the amount of time they were spending on it and an addiction, okay? Bill Gates, the same thing with his children. So what does that tell you, okay? If the people who manufacture these things and stuff are very leery about the negative consequences of them, okay? So what is addiction, okay? Addiction, the technical definition of addiction is that it's a condition that results when a person ingests a substance, for example, cocaine, alcohol, nicotine, or food, okay? Or engages in an activity such as gambling, excessive, most of us wouldn't complain about having sex unless it becomes an obsession and a compulsion, shopping, video gaming, watching YouTube. I mean, I've had a couple of kids who I've treated who actually had to drop out of school because they couldn't stop watching YouTube videos. Okay? One of the things that YouTube did recently, which has caused it to become an extremely addictive behavior, does anybody remember when you used to watch a YouTube video and when the video was over, you had to click on another one? What happens today when you finish a video? Another one pops up and stuff. Why do you think that is? Okay? It's designed to keep you tuned in, engaged, watching videos over and over again, and also watching the advertising that pops up. It's designed to create an addictive type of behavior. Okay? So these behaviors are pleasurable, but the continuation of them becomes a compulsive kind of behavior that interferes with ordinary activities, interferes with social relationships, interferes with work, interferes with school. I mean, I had an appointment with one of my patients on Saturday who's failing all of his classes in high school because he spends probably 6-7 hours a day doing online gaming with friends of his around the country. Okay? The minute he puts on his headset and stuff, it becomes impossible to turn it off and stuff and tune out and get his work done. And the only way that we've been able to help him to do his studying is to remove everything from his room. And right now he's going through withdrawal, okay, for not having access to those kind of things. The impact on families for these things. I mean, if any of you had, and I'm not going to assume that any of you have problems with these and stuff, but any of you have your parents and stuff, criticize you, complain about the amount of time you're spending in your room, on the computer, on the phone, watching games, okay? In my house, my wife forbids my sons and I to come to the table with our phones, because what are we going to do, when we have the phones there? Is we're going to be looking at things, okay? Go out to a restaurant nowadays, and you'll see couples having dinner and stuff, but they don't talk to one another. They're busy texting and communicating with other people. And how many of you may have texted, your brother or sister or boyfriend or girlfriend or mother or father from across the house instead of getting up and going to talk to them? Okay? So an addiction is a neurological disorder that has biological, psychological, and social and behavioral components to it. Okay? And I'm going to explain what that is right now. And this is just a stupid cartoon I found the other day, about two guys drinking and saying that this is not a habit of a highly effective individual, because addictions become habits. They become unconscious, uncontrollable compulsions and habits that we do. And when we're prevented from doing it, it produces a physiological and psychological reaction that is extremely unpleasant. Okay? So the 3 C's of addiction, have to do with control, compulsion, and chronicity. Okay? Control is the control that we lose over our ability to regulate these kind of behaviors and the use of these things. With almost all addictive behaviors start out with just recreational or social use. Okay? Recreational might be having a beer or smoking a bong and stuff with some friends and whatnot. It might be going out shopping. It might be playing a game on the internet or playing solitaire and stuff on your phone. Okay, or starting to send Instagram, and Snapchat updates to your friends. However, it can very quickly lead to a loss of control, meaning that when your phone bings or buzzes and stuff, there's almost an inability not to take a look at it and see who sent you an update and whatnot. Okay, when you go out with friends for a drink and stuff, there's the compulsion to have 2 or 3 or 4. Okay, when you go visit somebody's house and you see perhaps a pipe or a bong laying somewhere, there's the impulse and stuff to load it up and smoke it. Control also has to do with cognitive distortions, such as denial and minimization. Okay? Denying that you have an issue or a problem with something, that you've got it under control, I can stop at any time. Okay? I mean, do an experiment tonight. When you go home, turn your phone off, okay, and leave it in another room, okay, and see how that makes you feel. Okay? If you're unable to do that, okay, then you have an addiction to having that instrument with you all the time. And then there's tolerance and withdrawal. Okay? Those are the classic hallmark signs of an addiction. Tolerance means that having 1 beer isn't enough anymore. You have to have 2 or 3. You have a decreased sensitivity to the substance or the activity. Playing a video game maybe for half an hour and stuff, or watching YouTube videos for 10, 15 minutes might have been enough at one time, and now you have to do it for 15, 20, 30 minutes. I mean, I treat kids that can play video games for 7, 8, 9 hours in a shot and stuff. It's a great way to lose weight and stuff, not because you don't eat or drink or do anything else, but it's unhealthy. Right? And withdrawal refers to the physical, psychological discomfort when the addicted behavior or substance is taken away. Okay? Just like I described earlier with these kids that get their phones taken away, they flip out and freak out. Okay? In terms of withdrawal from substances, like heroin or cocaine, marijuana, or alcohol, stopping using those substances and stuff can cause a physical withdrawal. It can make you sick, give you headaches, nausea, and in some instances, very people with advanced alcoholism and stuff, it can actually cause something called DT or delirium tremens, and even lead to epileptic seizures and death if it's withdrawn too suddenly. The C for compulsion refers to the craving that people have to do the behavior, to take the substance, to have the drink and whatnot and stuff. And it's a craving that gets worse and worse over time as people begin to use these substances and do these activities more and more often. Okay? And that's what really is the hallmark of addiction. Okay? And then the continued use of a substance or the continued engagement in the activity, even though there are adverse consequences. Okay? You're failing, getting failing grades in school and stuff. You're losing relationships. People are getting upset or angry at you. Okay? I mean, one of the hallmarks of addiction, whether it's to a substance or some type of activity, is family tensions. Okay? Marital distress, or people in a relationship, conflict between kids and their parents and stuff over this behavior or the use of these substances. And then chronicity just simply has to do with the fact that once we're addicted to a substance or activity, it's extremely easy, once we stop using it or stop doing it, to relapse, okay, and go back to doing it again. In your psychology courses, you may have studied or read about a concept called spontaneous recovery. Okay? Spontaneous recovery is it's a behavior that can occur weeks, months, or years after you've stopped doing something. Okay? Is that somebody offers you a drink. Someone invites you to do a behavior and stuff that years ago was compulsive, and bam, you immediately relapse and start doing that behavior again. Okay? This is spontaneous recovery occurs in all animals and in human beings. Okay? So let's talk about how addictions work. Addictions interact with our nerve circuits and chemical messengers in our brain. Okay? They cause us to feel good, and a sense of euphoria and a sense of reward. And I'm going to show you in a second how that operates in the brain. The feeling better reduces negative feelings. Oftentimes we use a substance or a behavior because we're not feeling good, we're sad, we're down, we're depressed. We have to study for a psychology exam, and so we head to I've got my addiction. It's Haagen-Dazs ice cream. I head to the refrigerator and stuff and pull out a pint of that stuff and suck that down and handle it all in one setting. So it reduces negative feelings, and this gets to feeling normal. Okay, I mean, if there was, I don't buy this stuff because of it, but if there was Haagen-Dazs, if I had 7 pints of Haagen-Dazs ice cream in there, I'd be tempted to go and have one every single night and stuff, and that becomes the new normal. When you become addicted to something, not having it creates a craving to create the sense of pleasure and the reward of doing that behavior or imbibing that particular substance. Okay, and when you don't have it, you feel sick, okay? You feel sick, you don't feel normal, you don't feel good. Because what happens with addictions, okay? Addictions to substances or addictions to behavior is that they come to replace normal activities, okay? They replace, the good feeling it was just to hang out with your friends, maybe watch a movie and stuff, to talk shit with one another and stuff. And rather than that, you now need a substance or an activity and stuff in order to feel normal and good. In fact, if you do these things too much, your friends are going to just say, he or she's just not interested in me anymore, and those things drop out of your life. Okay? Now, addiction used to be perceived, okay, as a form of personal weakness, okay, or moral weakness. That if you had a drinking problem, you smoked cigarettes, you ate compulsively, you had other bad habits, you're just a weak person and stuff, and you need to just suck it up and be strong and get over yourself and stuff and kick the habit. We now know that it's not so simple, okay? We now know that there are brain circuits of neurons in the brain which actually cause us to be addicted, okay? There's something called the reward pathway, and I'm going to show you a picture of that in just a second in the brain, okay, that actually is critical for our survival as individuals and as a species, okay? I mean, I know in Professor Clifford's class you talk about evolution, you talk about genetics and epigenetics and whatnot. I mean, the fundamental impulse for all organisms is to survive and to reproduce, okay? And if any of you ever participate in reproductive activities, you know that it feels good, right? It's a pleasurable activity and whatnot, and there's an impulse to do it, frankly, as often as you possibly can. And this is what leads to the survival of our species. But that same neural circuit that causes us to want to do pleasurable things like reproduce can oftentimes cause us to get addicted to other types of activities, okay? So the same reward pathway in the brain that promotes survival, okay, and procreation also promotes addiction to drugs, to alcohol, to food, gambling, shopping, internet games, to chocolate, to Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and everything else. Huh? So this is an image. It's not very good and stuff. If any of you are interested, I'm going to leave I've got business cards here and whatnot. I'll be happy to give you those. My email address will be there, and I'll be happy to send you copies of these slides and stuff. But this is basically a picture of the reward circuit in the brain, okay? The brain stem, which is located down here, includes most of our primitive kind of reflexes, our senses, our instincts, and whatnot, okay? I mean, one of the critical areas is something called, where is this? The ventral tegmental, the VTA, okay, which is this thing here, okay? The VTA is full of all sorts of nerve endings, full of dopamine. Dopamine, have you heard about dopamine before? Dopamine is the feel-good neurotransmitter. It's one of dozens of neurotransmitters in the brain that make our neurons function and operate and whatnot. Dopamine's the neuron that makes us feel good. Okay? It gives us a sense of pleasure, a sense of satisfaction, and it's addictive as hell. Okay? When you do something pleasurable, the VTA here produces dopamine, which flows all throughout the brain. Okay? It goes up here to the prefrontal cortex, where we learn what's enjoyable and what's pleasurable and go looking for it. Okay? And most importantly, it stimulates, this is called the pleasure pathway right here. Whoops. Let me go back to that. It stimulates something called the nucleus accumbens right here. Okay? That's the area that causes us to get addicted. Okay? When dopamine reaches that area and stuff, that little part of the brain, and there are two of them on each side of the brain, produces all sorts of neuropeptides that are similar to opioids. Okay? We produce our own opioid-like hormones and neurotransmitters that make us feel good. Okay? The unfortunate thing is when we imbibe in a lot of drugs, and I'll talk about that in a second, and when we do certain other activities, they artificially produce additional dopamine and trigger the system in our brain. Okay? So dopamine is the reward drug. Okay? This is just an example, an image of a presynaptic neuron, okay, which releases dopamine into an area called the synapse, okay, between the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neuron. Dopamine fits into receptors on the postsynaptic neuron, and the more dopamine that gets into an area, the more pleasure and the more enjoyment that we experience. Okay? So the pathways to craving, as we can see here, stand back here. Desire is triggered when dopamine, which originates up here, as I said before, in the brainstem, travels around the brain, okay, and it affects other areas of the brain. Dopamine is produced in the VTA, the ventral tegmental area of the brain, which is just here, okay? And then it sends it throughout the brain through this reward pathway. Anything that's pleasurable triggers, okay, the VTA to produce dopamine in the brain, okay? And it sets up a feedback loop and whatnot. The more pleasurable activities you do, the more dopamine gets produced in your brain, up to a certain point. Right? The dopamine goes up to the prefrontal cortex. That's when we start figuring out, this feels good, I'm going to do some more of this and stuff, okay? Because we identify patterns, we identify triggers to pleasurable activities, whether that's a syringe full of heroin, whether it's our video console with Miami, what's that game called? Miami Vice or Vice City? Miami, yeah, what is it?
Grand Theft Auto?
Grand Theft Auto, yeah, stuff like that. I should know more about this stuff. It also sends dopamine to the amygdala, okay, where we develop a sense of pleasure and enjoyment and satisfaction. Okay, so these are the
well, again, you can't see this very well and stuff, but again, if you want copies of this presentation, I'll be happy to send it to you. But these produce hotspots in the brain. Now, what addiction does, I mean, this is a normal image of a presynaptic neuron that has little vesicles full of dopamine in them and stuff. When we do something enjoyable, okay, the neuron allows these vesicles to move to the surface of the presynaptic neuron, releases dopamine into the synapse, and it connects to receptors, dopaminergic receptors on the dendrite of the next neuron. Okay? That's what causes us to feel pleasure and enjoyment. Okay? When we get excited, okay, when something good happens to us, more dopamine, gets produced and released into the synapse. Okay? It temporarily floods into the synapse, into the postsynaptic neuron, and pleasurable activities like gambling, sex, shopping, or gaming, or the anticipation of doing those things actually produces dopamine. So, for those of you who are anticipating Christmas, because you're going to get some nice gifts, or seeing your family or whatnot, just the thought and the anticipation of that produces dopamine in your brain and brings about some good vibes and good pleasure. I mean, the idea of seeing your boyfriend or girlfriend at the end of the day, the idea of going home and having a good dinner, kicking back, watching your favorite television show, that produces dopamine in the brain as well. Now, what happens when we take drugs, okay, is they mess with that system. So in this instance, heroin, okay, heroin actually blocks dopamine inhibitors. So what heroin does is it prevents the reuptake. So what happens when dopamine gets flooded into the synapse? It then gets reabsorbed by the presynaptic neuron and stuff. Heroin actually blocks that process from happening and causes more dopamine to be in the synapse, creating a sense of high or pleasurable experience. Okay. Cocaine. Okay. Cocaine reverses, okay, the natural controlled flow of dopamine into the neurons, and it forces dopamine to rush into the synapses instead. Okay. So it interferes with the dopamine transport system here, okay, and it keeps dopamine, in the synapse longer and longer, whatnot. Cocaine is probably one of the most addictive substances on the planet. Okay, it produces, some of the biggest, quickest highs that you can possibly get. Okay, and it wears off very, very quickly. Okay, and we don't actually have an effective means of treating, cocaine addiction. So this is the pleasure pathway. This is the ventral tegmental area, which produces dopamine. It floods, and various chemicals and activities will cause dopamine to be sent to the nucleus accumbens, which I said before produces all these neuropeptides and opioids and natural opioids in the brain. It produces a sense of pleasure. Okay? And here's an example of one substance, nicotine, okay, which comes into the brain. Okay, we ingest it, smoke it, gets into our bloodstream, comes up here, stimulates the ventral tegmental area, sends dopamine up to the nucleus accumbens, and then these chemicals get spread throughout the rest of the brain, bringing about a sense of pleasure. Okay, each of these other chemicals, whether it's heroin, alcohol, benzodiazepines, barbiturates, cocaine, heroin, nicotine, amphetamines, opiates, THC, PCP, ketamine, and nicotine, all have an impact on the same system, as does behaviors that bring about pleasure. Any kind of activity that you do, okay, excessive eating, excessive exercise. Anybody ever heard that the athlete high, extreme athletes and stuff that run until they're about ready to collapse, and then they start getting a buzz on in order to be able to finish a marathon and stuff? That comes from triggering this pleasure system. And the problem with that is that you seek more and more of these kind of behaviors and activities, even if they're detrimental. So extreme athletes, I think most of us would probably love to get pleasure out of running and exercising and stuff and losing weight. But extreme athletes actually hurt themselves because they push themselves more and more to get that high and that buzz. Okay, so what happened? Whoops. Let's see. Is this working? So this is the behavior pathway. Let me go back. So rewarding behaviors, okay, become routine. Whether that's playing video games, using your phone, smoking, drinking, and whatnot, you subconsciously begin unconsciously to do these behaviors. You don't even think about it. In fact, if somebody challenges you and questions you about doing a behavior excessively, drinking, smoking, using a drug and stuff, you'll deny it and say it's no big deal, okay? However, it's hard to make these behaviors go away and extinguish this unconscious habit and compulsion, and the people resist change, and it becomes just a habit because it's part of our life. All right, let me go through this. So addiction is in many ways like a dog with a bone, okay? It never wants to let it go, okay? I mean, think about it. When you have a dog and stuff that has a toy or something in its mouth, it doesn't want to let it go because it gets pleasure out of, chewing on it and whatnot, okay? It bugs the dog until it gets what it wants, okay? It'll bug the crap out of you and stuff to get its toy, to get its bone, okay? It never forgets when and where it's used to getting its bone. So if you typically give a dog something in a regular way, a regular pattern, he's going to constantly want it because it's what makes him feel good, okay? And it thinks it's going to get a bone anytime you do anything that reminds it of the bone. So it's an unconscious desire, a need, to have pleasure and stuff that never goes away. So addiction is a brain disease, okay? And what I mean by that is that this is not an issue of willpower or morals or weakness and whatnot. Being addicted to a substance or behavior actively physically changes your brain, okay? So prolonged use of any type of substance or activity makes fundamental changes in the brain and lasting changes in the way that the brain operates, okay? So these are two images. These are images from a PET scan, which shows neural activity in the brain, okay? The image to the left, okay, is a normal brain, okay? And the yellow and the red indicate healthy activity, okay? Thinking, processing emotions, and whatnot. The cocaine-addicted brain, on the other hand, here, okay, shows decreased activity, okay, in most areas of the cerebral cortex. This is what happens and stuff. We kind of shut down when we're high, when we're on a buzz. This is why people like to get high and like to get drunk, okay? They can forget about things, not worry about things and stuff, easily distracted and whatnot, even though we need to be using our brain all the time, okay? I'm sure Professor Clifford has talked to you about the fact that, if somebody ever makes a comment to you that we only use 50% or 60% of our brain, that's wrong. I mean, you use 100% of your brain 100% of the time, and it's designed to function on food and water, not cocaine, not marijuana, not alcohol, and whatnot. When we put substances into it that don't mesh, that don't work properly, it affects brain functioning and brain activity, okay? So how long does the brain remember, these types of activities, okay? These are two images, and again, it's not very clear and stuff, of the brains. This is actually a composite image of the brains of cocaine addicts, okay, that are in recovery, who've been off of cocaine for quite some time. The image on the left, okay, is of a cocaine addict watching a video of the setting sun, of the ocean, of the mountains and stuff, just a nature video. And the image on the right is of them seeing a video having to do with implements used for the cocaine, snorting cocaine, okay? A mirror, okay? Piles of white powder and stuff, a rolled up $100 bill for snorting the cocaine and whatnot. And what happens, even weeks or months and even years after somebody has been addicted, to cocaine, is that their amygdala gets activated. It lights up, okay? Some of you if any of you have a craving, you like a particular food and stuff, and you go to what would be a good example? Like Thanksgiving, if your mother or somebody, makes great turkey or gravy and stuffing and mashed potatoes and whatnot, and you walk into the kitchen, and you smell that and stuff, what happens? You start salivating and stuff, you start getting excited, you start getting hungry, you want to have this. This is what happens to people who are addicted, okay? When they see the cues, okay, related to the substance or the activity that they're interested in, they start itching stuff because they want it. It automatically starts triggering that pleasure or reward circuit in their brain, and it's difficult to resist it, okay? And this lasts for a long time, okay? So this is, again, is a PET scan, image. At the top, this is a normal brain where red and yellow activity indicates normal brain activity, okay? Here, we've got the brains of cocaine abusers 10 days after they've stopped ingesting cocaine, and here, 100 days after they stopped ingesting cocaine. And you can see that there are still deficits as a result of having ingested that substance, for a certain length of time. So these substances change our brain, okay? Anybody who tells you that, marijuana is a natural substance, it grows and whatnot, well, it ain't natural to be putting it in your brain, okay? We have neurotransmitters that are similar to THC and cannabis and whatnot, but they're supposed to be in there, okay? The chemicals that we ingest are not, okay? And they have a profound impact on the brain, okay? So cognitive deficits that occur with substance use and stuff, or any kind of addictive behavior, are memory problems, particularly short-term memory loss, impaired ability memory problems, short-term loss, impaired abstraction, that's to think creatively, perseveration, meaning doing stupid things over and over again and stuff. Any of you have had friends and stuff who are stoners and stuff, who get stoned on a regular basis? They're stupid, no? They do stupid things, they make the same mistakes all the time and whatnot. Well, this is a result of the effects on the brain, okay? And there's a loss of impulse control, okay? Just doing stupid things and getting in trouble. The reason people have accidents, when they're drinking or they're high, is they don't think through the consequences of their behavior. It impairs their prefrontal cortex and their ability to think, anticipate, and plan, and therefore we do dumb things and stuff, and these deficits are similar to those who have brain damage, okay? Now, some of the more commonly abused drugs are alcohol, okay? Alcohol is a sedative and a hypnotic, okay? People who've been drinking for years, in order to be helped, need to be detoxed, okay, which can be extremely painful. People who are pregnant, okay, and who drink, women who are pregnant, even small amounts of alcohol can damage the fetus within them. Mothers and children share the same blood supply, and that little tiny developing brain and stuff is not used to dealing with alcohol. People who drink excessively, become impulsive. There's higher incidence of mental illnesses, suicide, depression, and even homicide, okay? DUIs, driving while intoxicated, driving under the influence. People who become addicted to alcohol oftentimes become addicted to other substances. That's what polydrug use is all about. And many of them have legal problems. I just received a phone call today for somebody who's looking for a therapist because he's been appointed by the court to get therapy, and it's probably because of a DUI. I haven't talked to the guy yet. Marijuana is a hallucinogen, okay? It produces in people a lack of motivation. It actually arrests and slows people's maturity in terms of personality development and whatnot. There's memory and learning impairment problems, okay? And the marijuana that people smoke today and stuff is nothing like it used to be when Professor Clifford and I were your age and stuff. It's much more potent, it's much more strong, all sorts of varieties, and the addictive potential for it is increased by tens and hundredfold. Cocaine is a stimulant. Cocaine and crack, as I mentioned before, it's one of the most highly addictive substances, along with heroin, because it has an immediate effect on the pleasurable effect on the brain. Okay? Methamphetamines are another class of stimulants. Methamphetamines do bad stuff. Hopefully none of you have been exposed to any of those kind of things. Causes people to have a tremendous amount of energy, bursts of speed. People feel that they're more intelligent and whatnot when they're taking it. However, it can lead to paranoia, okay? Hallucinations, and there's intense craving as a result of stopping to take methamphetamines. Heroin is becoming more and more of an issue in the United States nowadays, mostly because, for years, there was an epidemic of heroin in the United States that disappeared somewhat. Now, with so many people becoming addicted to painkillers and Oxycontin and Percodan and whatnot, and they can't get it anymore, there's a tendency to look to buy heroin and stuff. It's less expensive, easier to get and stuff, and much more highly addictive. And then there's all sorts of new drugs and stuff that are out there. Ecstasy, all of the club drugs and whatnot, okay, that do have addictive, qualities as well. So let me just move on. So common characteristics of people who are addicted is that sometimes they're unemployed because they're not able to hold a job, but many people with addictions do have jobs, okay? They rely on their job to fuel their habits and whatnot. Some will have no criminal history at all, while others will have multiple DUIs, they get arrested for fighting and whatnot, they get in trouble in school because it causes them to cheat, to plagiarize, to compromise their judgment and do things that aren't smart for them. They have difficulty coping with stress or anger. People with addictions and stuff usually have a very low frustration tolerance and whatnot, and poor impulse control. They're highly influenced by their peers and social groups. As a matter of fact, one of the principal treatment approaches for any type of addiction is changing the people that you frequent, okay? Is changing your social circles, because those are the people that you're used to doing this particular behavior with, and they become cues to continued use of the substance or the behavior. And then difficulty handling high risk or relapse situations, okay? Once addicted to a behavior or a substance, it is really easy to go back to doing it, okay? Any of you who've tried to stop a bad habit, okay, to go on a diet or to start exercising, know how easy it is to slip back into bad eating habits or a lack of exercise or just being a couch potato. Emotional and psychological immaturity. I mean, one of the drawbacks of marijuana is that it oftentimes seems to arrest people's development, okay? People who start smoking 15, 16, 17 years old just don't seem to mature at the same rate and stuff as people who don't use marijuana. Difficulty relating to family members. Oftentimes family members see that we've got an issue or a problem with a behavior or substance and try to stop it, and we get pretty pissed off and angry and stuff, when we're prevented from doing those things. Difficulty sustaining long-term relationships, because unless the person you're hanging out with or dating and stuff is into the same activities and behaviors and stuff, they get fed up with it and stuff. And unfortunately, we'll oftentimes sacrifice friendships or romantic relationships in order to do that addictive behavior. And then there are educational and vocational deficits, meaning that the addictions, whether they're to an alcohol or a drug or a behavior, can cause us to forego going to school, make bad decisions, when it comes to our education, or cause us to lose our jobs. Okay? Violence. I mean, alcohol disinhibits aggressivity. Okay? If any of you have been intoxicated or had a buzz on or something, you know that your temper and stuff is easy to be triggered. And if you've ever been in a bar, okay, where people get into pushing matches or bar fights or whatnot, it's because the alcohol disinhibits us from correct social behavior. Stimulants produce dose-dependent paranoia. So people who take speed, anybody ever drink, 4 or 5 cups of coffee to stay up all night and stuff and start acting weird and itchy and think that people are looking at you or, out to get you? That's a common symptom of stimulant use. And opiates chill people out. They make people feel relaxed, comfortable, drowsy, dreamy, sleepy, except when they need it, okay, and they don't have it and stuff. And people with opioid dependency and stuff can become very agitated and violent when they're trying to get their next fix. Okay? Who is at risk for becoming an addict? Okay? There are definitely genetic predispositions, okay? And what that means is we inherit not so much a likelihood to become a drug user or an alcoholic or whatnot, is that what we inherit is a neurological predisposition. Some of us are more susceptible, okay, to pleasure, okay, and the things that trigger pleasure. And when we have that susceptibility, we're going to go out looking for it any way we can get it, okay? If you come from an addictive family, so to say, what that simply means is that you're probably a sensualist and stuff. You like to do enjoyable things, and you need to do enjoyable things that are healthy for you, okay, and avoid the unhealthy one. People who start using a substance, who start doing a behavior at an earlier age, that's harder to give up later on because the brain is developing, the brain is forming, and it might create some habits that are difficult to shake later on. Childhood trauma, okay, oftentimes can lead to people using substances and becoming addicted. People with learning disorders, people with ADD, ADHD, particularly those that are taking medication, okay? Vyvanse, Adderall, Ritalin and stuff, that can be a gateway to abusing other substances later on. And mental illness. People that are depressed, people that are anxious, bipolar, or psychotic and stuff have a greater likelihood of developing substance use. Now, I'm going to spend 10 minutes and then we'll wrap up talking about treatment for addictions, okay? So as I mentioned before, for most of the history of mankind, okay, it was believed that people who became addicted, okay, to substances and behaviors and stuff, they're just weak people, okay? If they were strong, they had strong personality, strong characteristics and stuff, they wouldn't develop a dependency on something. Or when they recognized that they had it, they would just give it up and stuff. They'd stop it. And it's only been in the last decade, the last 10, 15, 20 years and stuff, that we've come to recognize as a result of developments in brain imaging, and developments in psychology and the neuroscience, that addictions are really a neurological disorder. They're a psychological and neurological disorder. Now, the most common treatment in the United States for any type of addiction, okay, is the AA model. Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. It's basically, AA is a self-help kind of group. Some of you may have attended AA meetings or know people that go to them and stuff. It's based on the idea that an addiction is a chronic disease and it's only treatable by total abstinence, not doing the behavior, not drinking, not smoking, not doing drugs. AA believes in adherence to a 12-step model. It's kind of an ideology that emphasizes spirituality, the use of fellowship, going to meetings and stuff. AA recommends that when you first recognize you have an addiction, you should go to a meeting every day, every night with fellow, addicts, drug addicts, smokers, alcoholics, and whatnot, to be together, to get emotional support and stuff, to have people to tell your story to. It's a spiritual approach that relies on a belief and adherence to God, to a higher power, and whatnot. There are over 2 million members of AA around the world, and over 100,000 meetings and stuff that occur around the world. It's the largest self-help group in the world. It's also the most prevalent treatment approach in the United States. So anyone who goes to a treatment program for smoking, for alcohol, drug addiction and stuff, will be exposed to an AA approach, possibly part of a number of other treatments and stuff, but there'll almost be an AA component to it and stuff. Problem is that there's no real records about the effectiveness of AA. I mean, AA, by its very nature, Alcoholics Anonymous, is anonymous. It doesn't keep records of who attends, how often, and no data about the effectiveness of it as a treatment approach. Okay? There have been no experimental or clinical studies about the effectiveness of AA. AA basically says our approach speaks to itself. There are definitely hundreds of thousands of people who've gone to AA, who've been able to stop drinking, using drugs, and whatnot, have been successful. However, we also believe that there's a significant number of people who attend AA or NA for a while and then who go back to drinking or using a drug. In fact, some of the studies done simply doing surveys with AA members seem to indicate that there's only a tiny percentage, perhaps less than 10% of people that totally abstain from using a substance after they've started going to AA. Many people go back either to relapse to serious drinking, but many people go back to drinking in I wouldn't say in a controlled manner, but in a less problematic manner. A comprehensive analysis of treatment programs around the world for alcoholism, that most practitioners rank the AA approach rather low on the scale of effective treatments, and I'm going to talk to you just for a few minutes about other treatment approaches that have been documented as successful. In many instances, when someone's addicted to a drug, to alcohol, to smoking, to cocaine, to heroin, to opioids, prescription drugs, and whatnot, they have to go through an initial stage of recovery called detox. Okay? This is a time where you're flushing the drug out of your system and whatnot, going through sometimes some painful withdrawal symptoms that oftentimes are treated with medication. Okay? Any of you who've ever stopped trying to do an addictive behavior, okay, to go on a diet and stuff, to stop exercising, to put your phone away and not use it for days or weeks on end and whatnot, know that it can be a painful experience because you're not getting that pleasurable rush in your mind. Okay, and withdrawal symptoms can include anxiety, depression, nausea, seizures in some instances, and just being in a bad and foul mood. For most people with alcohol, tobacco, and opioid addiction, detox is just the beginning of a long period of recovery, and for some people, it lasts for their entire life. Treatment for addictions involves both inpatient and outpatient approaches. There are lots of inpatient programs for everything from alcohol to drug abuse to video game addiction to sex addiction to food addiction and whatnot. These are extremely expensive programs, okay, and are not accessible to most of us. Most programs involve outpatient group therapy or individual therapy, medical intervention, psychotherapies, AA or NA, as I mentioned before, and there are some preventive programs. Some of you may actually have attended middle schools and high schools where there are actually DARE programs, drug abuse and resistance education programs, to try to prevent you from getting addicted to drugs to begin with. Many people with opioid addiction use a maintenance therapy with medication. So we know now, because of the pleasure circuit in the brain, that there's a tremendous amount of, there are all sorts of chemicals that can be effective in mitigating the impact of drugs on the brain, okay, and replacing certain drugs, okay? Many of the more effective drugs, such as methadone or naltrexone and stuff, or Suboxone and stuff, are designed to prevent alcohol or heroin or opioids from having a pleasurable effect on the brain. It basically blocks the impact, but also reduces the withdrawal symptoms from these things. Sometimes these medications are taken for many years in order to avoid relapse. All right. Now, some of the psychological treatments that are used, that aren't used as often as they should, but are effective. Things like coping or social skills training. Oftentimes, people who have become addicted to a drug or a substance or a certain type of behavior do so because they're awkward, they're uncomfortable, they're shy, they don't have the necessarily coping skills to function in their social life, in their professional life, or school. Teaching people these skills oftentimes alleviates the need for drinking. I mean, how many of you, when you've gone to a party and stuff, I mean, I don't know if anybody dances anymore when you go to parties. Does anybody dance? You go to parties, a few of you and stuff. How many people, when you go out to a club and stuff, need to have a drink or two, okay, in order to dance, in order to relax and stuff, kind of get in the mood and whatnot? Well, you don't need to do that, but most of us do that because we don't know how to dance, and taking a few drinks and stuff makes us think like we're John Travolta or I don't know who it would be. I'm dating myself here, but somebody who can dance well. Okay? So coping skills, teaching skills can help us to deal with things, and helping people with to deal with the context. Oftentimes, our addictions occur in certain social situations. There are certain cues, and unless we come up with replacement behaviors, for the addictive behavior, we're likely to do those behaviors again when the cues come up. So anticipating and coming up with new coping skills is necessary. Relapse prevention. I mean, one of the major problems with the AA approach to treating substance abuse is the idea that if you have a drink, you have failed. Okay, when you go to AA for each year that you remain sober and stuff, you get a chip and stuff. There's a celebration and stuff. When you fall off the wagon, when you have a drink and stuff, you failed. Okay. And oftentimes when that failure occurs, people will go back to drinking or use a substance excessively. We know that 60% of people, after they receive treatment, relapse, okay, with addictions and whatnot. So in the majority of cases, it's going to happen. Relapse prevention anticipates these things are going to happen and stuff and gives people skills to deal with it. Relapse prevention actually works effectively in preventing people from going back into a severe problem. Okay? Community reinforcement. Addiction provides positive reinforcement for all sorts of behaviors that a person hasn't been doing during the time that they were addicted. It involves identifying external and internal cues or contingencies for desirable behaviors and getting people to do things that they used to do, okay, that will give them pleasure before they started playing video games, for 8 hours a day or drinking a case of beer. Motivational enhancement therapy is a different focus. It's a form of therapy that tries to get people to be motivated to change their behaviors, okay, and to stop using these substances and stop the addictive behavior. It's based on the idea that any of us can change, okay, as opposed to somebody who's weak and immoral and does horrible things, okay. Anybody can develop an addiction, but anybody can overcome it. Marital and family therapy is another intervention. Oftentimes, addictions destroy families, okay? And oftentimes, the destruction has to be repaired. There's a relationship between addiction, marital satisfaction impacts addiction, and addiction impacts marital satisfaction in families. So intervening at the family level, repairing damages in relationships, and getting a family on board is an essential aspect of treating any type of addiction. Then there's something new, okay? Recently, a new physical treatment has emerged for the treatment of addictions, and that's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, okay, or TMS. TMS is a magnetic method used to stimulate small regions of the brain. And during TMS, a magnetic field or coil generates a magnetic or electrical impulse that's placed near the head of the person and impacts on a particular area of the brain. It's actually proven to be an extremely effective treatment for certain types of addictions. It stimulates the area, the pleasure circuit of the brain, okay? It actually alters neurons that have been altered by chemicals or drugs or behavior, and relieves, in many individuals, that craving to have the substance or do the behavior. We're just at the forefront of this type of thing. Okay? Whoops, I don't know what I did there. Anyway, let me wrap up. So what I want you to walk away from this is that addictions is a major problem, okay? If you don't know somebody that has an addiction, okay, or you're not addicted to a particular type of behavior, it's unusual, okay? You need to be aware that addictions are a result of changes in all of our brains. All of us are susceptible to have these changes occur in the pleasure pathway in our brain, and there are interventions that can be used, okay, to get control back over these types of things, okay? I pointed out some of those things today. We will, in the next 10, 20, 30 years, discover all sorts of other ways of intervening and helping people with addictions and teaching them adaptive types of behaviors. This is what's exciting about psychology, okay, in the neurosciences. So if any of you are, I know many of you are probably taking this class or at Anza and taking psychology as a general education subject, but think about it as a possible career, okay? It's an exciting field that teaches you all sorts of things about your brain, okay, and the brain of your family and friends, teaches you skills for controlling your brain and controlling your behaviors, replacing maladaptive behaviors with adaptive ones, okay? As Professor Clifford said, there's a huge number of jobs that are available nowadays, okay, for people with psychological degrees. The Affordable Care Act, which now mandates that all insurance companies provide mental health and substance use treatment, okay, has created a tremendous need for professionals who are trained in this particular area. Now, my school, Palo Alto University and the Pacific Graduate School of Psychology, is a professional school of psychology. And we've been in the Bay Area for over 40 years, training psychologists at the bachelor, master's, and doctoral level. Okay? We have a bachelor degree program that we teach here at Anza College, where we offer 2 degrees, a degree in psychology and social justice, and a degree in business and psychology, where we teach about these things. The graduates of that program are typically transfer students from Anza or Foothill College. They complete 2 years of studies here in their general education requirements, transfer to PAU and get a bachelor degree in psychology, and then we have about 20-25% of those students who go on to get master's degrees or doctorate degrees with us and become counselors or psychologists. The majority go out and get jobs in local community agencies where they may work with people with substance use issues and whatnot, or psychological counseling. So keep that in mind. It's a very, very good career path. It brings a tremendous amount of personal knowledge and information. Hopefully some of this information will be useful today.